what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again today doing another video. And the subject of today's video, we're going to be examining the rise and fall of the Mike D'Antoni Houston Rockets era. So if you haven't checked out previously, I had a whole series called Rise and Fall where I examined different NBA contenders over the years and how they rose to contention and then how they really kind of started petering out. So today I'm going to revisit that series and examine it with the Houston Rockets of the last couple of years under the guidance of Mike D'Antoni. So if you're unfamiliar with the setup, basically I'll go through each season, talk about the regular season and the postseason, why they succeeded and failed, and basically just go through the trajectory of the team. So I'm actually going to start with a season before D'Antoni got there, the last one with Kevin McHale and B.J. Bickerstaff as both of the head coaches. They fired McHale quickly into the season, but B.J. took over, or J.B., excuse me. And they were a very average team throughout the year, as you can see from being 41-41. Offense was pretty good, being 7th, but defense was relatively poor, being 21st. And really at this point, Dwight was still a decent defender, but not as good as his prime a few years prior. Pat Beverly was a good defender, but not what he was considered a few years later when he was on the Clippers, I'd say. He was more just an irritant. And then Trevor Ariza was also a good defender, but besides those guys, Corey Brewer was okay too, but they just didn't have like a collective effort on defense where they were trying super hard. They also had a lot of guys that they brought in that they didn't really know how good that they would be this season, like for instance, Marcus Thornton, Jason Terry, Ty Lawson. Those were all guys playing pretty big roles for not really being expected to play that big of roles. And really, I'd say the downfall of this team was just that they had basically no offense outside of James Harden. You can see Ariza averaged 13 points a game and Dwight averaged 14, but really not much offensive production outside of Harden. And come the playoffs, the Warriors keyed in on that and basically realized they don't have to guard anybody but Harden. And I think the big difference of why they lost is basically if you look at the stats outside of Harden, Michael Beasley played okay because they had hired him just to play in the playoffs, but Trevor Ariza shot 25% from the field, Beverly 27, and Jason Terry 34. And those are all guys that played pretty big minutes. Those are 3 of their top 5 guys in this series. So they just overall didn't have much offensive creation for this team. And they lost in the first round as a result. So going into Mike D'Antoni's first year, he kind of comes in and revamps and says, all right, we are still not going to be that great on defense, but we're going to be basically the best offensive team. The Rockets have the best offense in the league outside of the Kevin Durant Warriors. Their record jumps up 14 wins, up to 55-27, surprising a lot of people. Dwight Howard leaves in free agency, but they basically bring in Clint Capella as a starter to do what Dwight was giving them, putting up production of 13 points and 8 rebounds a game. Besides that, they brought in key free agent signings of Eric Gordon, who won 6th Man of the Year this year, I believe, and Ryan Anderson, who put up really good efficiency, shot over 40% from 3. From the field he didn't do that well, but from 3, over 40% is really solid. They also traded basically nothing for Lou Williams at the trade deadline. I believe they traded maybe like a 2nd-round pick and Corey Brewer to get Lou Williams, because the Lakers didn't really need him anymore. And so you had a lot more offensive options this year. Harden still did his thing. Ariza still did his thing. But between Eric Gordon, Ryan Anderson, and Lou Williams, you had basically 3 new, very capable offensive options, especially Lou Williams and Eric Gordon. They were really excited about those guys being able to create their own shot and giving Harden some playmaking relief. But you can see, even just from looking at their numbers, they were relatively inefficient in doing so. During the regular season, Gordon and Ariza shot 41% from the field, Beverly 42%, Lou Williams under 39% when he was playing for the Rockets. And that would translate to the playoffs because they played better defenses come the playoffs, especially when they faced the Spurs in round 2. Again, everybody's efficiency dropped off quite a bit, and when you already have a team that didn't play that much defense, if the offense is struggling, they're naturally not going to do that well. Big differences here were, you know, I don't want to point to anyone in particular, but Ryan Anderson, who was really solid in the regular season, he really dropped off in the playoffs, going down to 39% from the field, 28% from three when he was a deadeye during the regular season. Also, Lou Williams just never really brought them the production that they were hoping he would. You know, they thought, okay, this is a guy who can average 18 points a game and can be kind of the second dude after Harden offensively, but he just really wasn't that. You can see regular season he averaged 15, and that was pretty good, but come to playoffs he was averaging about 12, and Eric Gordon, kind of same thing. Like, they thought maybe he can be the second dude, but again, he averaged under 13 points a game in the playoffs, and there was just an ingredient missing on this team. They needed maybe like a second bona fide star, which led into the next season where this team really hit its apex. They traded basically Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell, and Pat Bev to get established star CP3 in here. The offense moves up one spot to first. The big difference here is the defense. They brought in PJ Tucker from free agency, who was a big acquisition defensively. Chris Paul was a really good defensive player. Trevor Ariza, again, was really solid on defense, as he had previously been. Clint Capella is a big difference, so he became much more of a rim protector and averaged 2 blocks a game, and also developed a lot offensively, shooting 65% from the field, putting up 14 and 11. Also, an underrated signing was Luc Mbah a Moute, who provided a lot of really good defense for this team as well. So you kind of transformed from basically only having Ariza playing defense to Ariza, Chris Paul, PJ Tucker, Clint Capella, Luc Mbah a Moute, and they had a good defensive identity. Along with that, Eric Gordon probably had his best year on the Rockets, averaging 18. Chris Paul had a pretty decent year. His stats were down, but he played well. And he actually missed a good amount of games, so it's impressive that they still won 65. They probably could have won quite a few more if he had been healthy and not missed 24 games. So riding into the playoffs, they go very far, obviously, and Chris Paul's injury was a big reason why they didn't get to the finals and win it all. He went down in the last 2 games of the Western Conference Finals. But they actually all played pretty well when they were playing, you know. Harden put up his typical 29 on inefficient shooting. Chris Paul was relatively efficient and put up 21 and 6. You know, if you want to look at some playoff underperformers, I guess you'd say Ariza played pretty poor for himself. He was a big contributor to the 27 missed threes that the Rockets encountered in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. Besides that, you know, honestly, the team played really well. It's just that CP3 was injured, so they didn't get a chance to go on and win the finals. Going into the next year, the mindset was basically, let's run it back. But they had a decision to make. Chris Paul was a free agent, so they said, are we going to pay Chris Paul and basically try and run this back with a few swapped-in role players, or are we going to let him walk and kind of do a reset built around Harden and the rest of the role players and maybe bring in somebody new? They opted for the former, and they said, let's just pay Chris Paul and bring in new role players and forego the likes of Trevor Ariza and I'm trying to think, there was one other key guy that they lost who I'm not thinking of here. Trevor Ariza and Luc Mbah a Moute. So they lost a lot of their wing defense, and they basically said, let's replace them with Carmelo Anthony and Austin Rivers and Danuel House, who, you know, Danuel House became a pretty nice rotation player, but he was a G League player, and they didn't really know what they were getting in him. Rivers is not a defensive stopper, and Carmelo definitely isn't. So they basically were, it's as if they had a plumbing problem in their house, and they said the solution was to, like, paint the walls a new coat of paint. It's, like, very unrelated how they were trying to solve their defensive problem by bringing in an ISO scorer in Carmelo. Well, this new batch of rotation role players didn't last super long. Carmelo got cut. Kenneth Faried played for them for a little bit, but didn't really do much of note. Same with James Ennis. Austin Rivers played pretty decent. Same with Gerald Green. They had been bringing him in a lot the last couple of years just on a free agent deals every so often to play for them. But basically the core of the team was CP3, Harden, Tucker, Capella, Eric Gordon. That was really the core. And the difference just this year was they didn't have much depth. And again, CP3 missed a good amount of games, like 24 again. Clint Capella missed 15, which isn't a ton, but it's significant. Same with Eric Gordon. Capella actually had his best year, putting up 17 and 13. But they just asked too much out of Harden, which is the antithesis of why they brought in CP3, which is to take pressure off of him. Come the playoffs, they really just didn't have the firepower without the defensive stoppers of Ariza and Luka Mbah-a-Moute. And again, they lost to the Warriors even without Durant. Basically they just were... You can see the big difference this season to me was that the defense went from 6th down to 17th because they just... without those defensive stoppers on the team, the guys who were offensively focused were not really thinking about that side of the ball, and you basically went from your best wing defender being Ariza and Luka Mbah-a-Moute to your best wing defender being arguably Eric Gordon, who is a very bad, or I guess Danuel House, but he only played limited time, but Eric Gordon was arguably your best perimeter defender who, he's a bad defender, so you get what you get. And then this most recent season, they thought they needed another shakeup, so they swapped CP3 and 2 picks for Russell Westbrook. I put the record up there of what it would have been if they would have played 82 games like a regular season. So they were 50 and 32. Again, lost in the second round. So they, in totality, under Mike D'Antoni, second round exit, Western Conference Finals exit, second round. So they always did get relatively far, but just not quite far enough. And you look at this team, and again, they really lacked a lot of depth. You basically had the reliable piece. They traded Capella for Robert Covington mid-season, essentially. So basically, by the end of the year, you could rely on Harden, Westbrook, Tucker, Danuel House, Covington, Eric Gordon. So like 6 guys you really trusted. Eric Gordon had by far his worst year in Houston, shooting under 37% from the field and under 32% from 3. Westbrook and Harden each played pretty decent. Westbrook actually had a really good year for himself. Besides that, PJ Tucker played decent. Robert Covington played decent in his time there. Defensively, offensively, he actually wasn't that good. And the whole point of this whole trading away your center for a small forward was to space the court for Westbrook, but I'm not really sure how good of an idea that was, because I just don't think that you can have a 6'6" guy going up against 7-footers in the playoffs. Again, you'll see as far as their offense and defensive rating, offense was still good, but not that elite level, because again, they had traded away quite a bit of their depth to acquire Westbrook, and they have the 2 max deals between Westbrook and Harden, and there's not much room for really good supporting role players when you have to pay 2 guys collectively like $70 million. So the offense was still good, but not as it wasn't historically great, and then the defense was again very average. They had Covington and Tucker who were good defenders, and Danuel House had become a good defender, but besides that, nobody really honed in on defense. But they actually were better than people thought, though. People thought they'd be 28th in defense, and being middle of the pack was actually quite respectable for this team. Come the playoffs, Russell Westbrook was injured part of the first round, so that impacted them a bit. And when he came back, he didn't really seem like he was as good as he had been. Obviously, you look at his numbers, only putting up 18 points a game on pretty bad efficiency. It was a lot worse than the regular season. And really, they were just really formulaic in their approach. The play was basically give James Harden the ball. He either isolates and scores, or he drives, you bring help defense after he beats his man, and then he kicks it, and hopefully the guy in the corner makes the open 3. And that's just a really really risky way to play, because if a guy isn't hot that night, you're going to lose because he's going to miss all those open shots. And that's what ended up happening. And the Lakers were able to very quickly pick up on that simplistic offense and beat them pretty easily. So there you go, guys. In totality, a relatively successful era for Mike D'Antoni, but just they had such high expectations that it felt like almost a failure. But I don't think it was. I think it was very successful. Collectively, they got out of the first round every year that D'Antoni was there, and they got basically as close as you can get to winning a championship, besides the bad luck of a really untimely injury to one of your star players in CP3 in 2018. So there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.